Okay, everybody. Glad you all got to make it to Blowing Rock today. I know it's a little chilly. We won't be underneath the gazebo for too long, maybe 15 minutes or so. Then we'll run around the woods and do some stuff. All right, so my name is Kevin. I live here in Blowing Rock. I've been here about 20 years. A little background on me. I'm originally from Kentucky. I grew up on a farm in the middle of nowhere, which is pretty middle of nowhere today. I have been studying wilderness survival skills for about 30 years now. So I teach a lot of classes like you all, middle school. My wife's a middle school teacher here in town, so I do a lot of work with her. I'm also on a board of directors of a kids camp called Buffalo Cove. It's located outside Boone. They do year-round education in schools. They also have a summer camp that's very fun for kids your age. So we go out in the woods. We spend a whole week, sometimes 2 weeks, canoeing, backpacking. There's a base camp we hang out at and just learn wilderness skills. So today we're going to talk about the basic of survival. And I'm sure there'll be lots of questions as we go, which is fine. I'll try to be brief. Like I said, I know it's cold. So today we're going to talk about basically the 4 elements of survival, which I've got them kind of listed down here. We'll go over more in detail as we go. But I just want to start off with just a recognition of our place in the universe, our place on this earth, which is always a circle. Everything's in a circle. Life is a circle. And we look at the 4 directions to give us guidance and to give us different, ways of looking at the world. And most of my wilderness survival stuff is based on native teachings. My background mostly is from the Tracker School, which is a wilderness survival school in New Jersey. It's run by a man named Tom Brown. So when Tom Brown was 7 years old, he met an Apache shaman warrior scout who was 83 years old. And for the next 11 years, Tom and his boyhood friend, Rick, spent as much time as they could with the man named Stalking Wolf. Now, Tom called Stalking Wolf grandfather because in the native tradition, a grandfather is a teacher or an elder of wisdom. So grandfather Stalking Wolf spent his entire life wandering the entire of Americas. He walked from the tip of the Arctic Circle to the tip of South America, Patagonia, twice in his entire lifetime. He never lived in a house. He never rode in a car. He never did anything like that. He continually lived off the land for his entire life. So when he finally passed into the next world, over 102, like I said, he had never lived in a house before. So that was his entire life. So when Tom met him when Tom was 7, Tom spent as much as he could learning from grandfather Stalking Wolf. And then when grandfather took his final walk and went back to his people, Tom spent the next 10 years testing the skills. So he would go to Alaska in the wintertime and strip off all his clothes and disappear into the wilderness for 6 months. Or he'd go to the desert in the middle of the summertime and he would strip off all his clothes and disappear in the desert for 6 months. So he tested these skills for 10 years. And then how he got kind of famous, he was also a tracker. And so he would track lost people and criminals and things like that. So his reputation of finding lost people in the woods and of tracking down criminals, that's how he got famous. And he wrote a book. He's written like 19 books now. There's been movies made about him. So he's a pretty famous dude. He's like 74 now. So he's getting up there in age. So his school, like I said, is based in New Jersey. It's called the Tracker School. So I've been studying with Tom for 27 years, plus a lot of other indigenous elders and different schools of the same kind of principles. So today, like I said, we're going to talk about some different elements of survival. So we're going to start with what we call the law of threes. And what that pertains to, it kind of goes into this basic order of survival stuff. So think about wilderness survival or survival any place, and what do you think the first one of 3 seconds, what do you think that would pertain to in a survival situation or a stressful situation? Anybody got any ideas? All right, so let's think about it this way. So 3 seconds is how long you have in a situation where it could be a car wreck or your canoe tips over or someone, tries to rob you, or all of a sudden you're in a survival situation. You're You know, you're lost. You realize you're lost. 3 seconds is what you have to get your brain under control, because that's how long it takes for the panic mode to kick in. And if you don't get yourself under control in 3 seconds, the fight or flight is going to kick in. And most of the time it's flight or you freeze up. So that's what the 3 seconds is. So we train on how to, when something happens, you stop, you take a deep breath, you evaluate your situation, and then you decide how you're going to act. So that first 3 seconds is crucial. Then you got 3 minutes. 3 minutes is the next level. Oh, I knew that was going to happen. Wind is terrible today. So 3 minutes refers to your breath. So basically, if you get injured or you're underwater or you're in some kind of situation where you can't breathe, you've got about 3 minutes before you pass out, and then you're pretty much history after that. So getting your breath under control in 3 minutes, that's how you're going to stay alive. The next is 3 hours. Now, look at these 4 over here: shelter, water, fire, food. What do you think pertains to 3 hours? How long can your body go in what state in 3 hours before it shuts down? You got any ideas? What do you think? Water's close, but not really. So basically 3 hours pertains to shelter. So if you're in a survival situation, say you fall in your canoe, you have no gear other than what you're wearing, which is your clothes, or your car gets stranded in the middle of the desert or in the middle of a snowstorm, you basically have 3 hours to come up with some kind of shelter that's going to keep your body alive. So everybody know about hypothermia, hyperthermia, those kind of concepts? So that's what that 3 hours is. If you don't get your body temperature back into the range of 98.6 up to 99 at the most, then you start going into either hyper or hypo. Hypo's cold, hyper's hot. So you got about 3 hours to regulate your body temperature, and most of the time that's got to do with shelter. So the next is 3 days, which is water. So water, you basically have 3 days without going with water before you may not die in 3 days, but you're going to be so debilitated that you can't function anymore. You'll just be laying on the ground trying to function. And then, you know, everybody always wants to jump right to food, right? But really, 3 months is what you have for food until your body, oh, wait, I left one out. It's supposed to be 3 weeks, not 3 months. 3 months is what this one down here backs to. So basically, food goes to 3 weeks before your body shuts down. And don't go anywhere. All right, so today we're going to go out in the woods a little bit, and we're going to practice these elements of survival. We're going to do some hands-on stuff. We'll do a little bit of lecturing, but I'll try to keep you guys going as much as possible. So because we're looking at the first element, because we only have 3 hours before a body shuts down, we're going to focus on shelter first. Shelter's super crucial because, like I said, you have to regulate your body temperature. You have to keep it at a certain level. Thank you, Wind. So we are going to practice. Where's my little bucket at? We're going to practice how to build a wilderness survival shelter. We're going to go down here in the woods here in a minute. We're going to practice how to build a shelter that'll keep you alive in a situation where you have no gear whatsoever. Now, you can always carry stuff with you. So your first line of defense, every time you leave the house, is what's on your body. That's your basic shelter. So every time you leave the house, you got to be thinking about what you're wearing, especially if you're going to be out in the woods, you're going to be out maybe taking a long car ride. So your clothing is always your first line of defense. And some other things you can carry that help you, like I never leave the house any place without at least one garbage bag. Every pack I have, all in my truck, sometimes even in my pockets, even if I'm going for a hike, I'll have at least a garbage bag, because a garbage bag is something that folds up nice. It will regulate your body temperature if you fill it full of leaves and cover up with it or crawl inside of it. I have used these for so many different things. You can cut a hole in the top of it, make it into a nice little rain jacket. So this is just something you think about every time you leave the house. What's my clothes like? Now, most of us grow up wearing cotton. This is cotton. In survival school, we call cotton death cloth because basically it retains about 4% of its heat, maybe up to 10 if you're in a hot situation. But if it gets wet, it retains no heat whatsoever. The next level is stuff like Polartec or like the nice synthetic stuff. It retains about 20-some%, maybe up to 30, depends on how thick it is. So if you get wet with this stuff on, you're going to stay a little bit more warm. The best is wool, which we always carry a lot of wool stuff with us. Wool retains about 40 to 50% of its heat when it gets wet. So in survival situations or when we're going out in the woods, wool is like one of our best choices, or one of the really super nice Polartec with Gore-Tex over top of it. But you know, Gore-Tex rips. Polartec burns. Wool is one of those things that you don't have to worry about. It won't hardly burn. It can get sparks on it. It stays warm even when wet. Dries a little slow. That's okay. Another thing we always carry in our packs when we go out on, even for day trips, is a nice thermal blanket. These nice emergency blankets. They've got this lining in them that's made out of Mylar. So these are originally called space blankets because they developed them for the astronauts. And so basically when you wrap this around you, it reflects all the heat back into you. So wrap it around you, make a little shelter out of it, whatever. I like to carry these also when you're making a shelter, because if you cover your shelter up with it, with the heat reflecting inward, it's going to retain a lot of the heat. It's going to reflect it back to you. So that's what these are for. Now there's a shelter we'll talk about when we go down to the woods here in a little while. It was developed by a Canadian survivalist called, his name was Mors Korchansky. And he... Oh, yeah.
I have a question about the thermal blanket.
Uh-huh.
Which side should stick out, the silver side or the red side?
So the red side will be outside, and the inner part should be closest to you will be the reflective part. Because that way it's like reflecting your heat back to it and back to your body. So it's keeping you warmer so you can wrap up in it, stay warmer. So there was another guy, Mors Korchansky was a famous survivalist from Canada, and he developed this cool little shelter where you use that as kind of like a little lean-to, and you put a piece of plastic on the outside of it, and you make like a tent out of that and a piece of plastic, and you build a fire, and it warms it up like a greenhouse. And it's literally, you can be in a snowstorm, and it'll be 80 degrees in one of those things. So that's pretty, we'll talk about that when we go down in the woods. So, shelter, anything else? Anybody got any questions about shelter so far? What kind of clothes everybody have on? Looks like mostly cotton, huh? Luckily, it looks like a pretty nice day today. We're not going to be out around the water, so we don't have to worry about it too much. But if you do, like if you're ever out on a day like today and you notice like you've been sweating, you're running around and you can't get warm, it's because your clothes you got on. So you've gotten sweaty, you may have just been out there and you're like, you know, everything's sticky to you and you can't warm up. That's because you're wearing cotton most likely. All right, so as we go throughout the next couple hours, like I said, we're going to go down, we're going to work on a little shelter. I'm going to show you a little shelter design. Then we'll talk about water a little bit. Now, water, there's not much around here right now. However, I'll show you an area where there could be some water if we decide to go find some. And we'll talk about water when we walk down to that area. Then fire. Everybody loves making fire. I brought some fire making stuff. So we'll bust that out here in a little while when we get back from building a shelter, and we'll do a little bow drill demonstration. Anybody ever did a bow drill before? Seen anybody do it? We'll see what happens. Bow drills are fun to play with. Bow drill. This is a hand drill, by the way. This is a fire making device as well. And then the last thing we'll talk about is food a little bit. So if we have time, we'll set up a throwing range, and I'll teach you how to throw a throwing stick that you can take small game with. Now, I don't want you to take small game, so don't go home and start killing your neighbor's cats or anything, because we'll talk about plants, which are much easier to find. However, learning how to throw a throwing stick is fun. You can practice at your house. It's always a fun thing to learn how to do. So that's kind of what our day is. And then we're going to we'll come up and we'll talk about some of the more advanced stuff because I've got a bunch of stuff up here. Some bags that I've made, some flint and steel, some arrowheads, stuff like that, some baskets, basket material. This is a wood burn bowl. Here's some fire making stuff. Here's some nice fish spears. We'll talk about that in a little while. So, all right, anybody have any questions so far? Yes, sir.
Like related back to us, like as city people who drive in our cars and go from one warm place or cool place to another, like what sort of real world situations do you think about, or could they think about where they wouldn't think, carrying a trash bag around is silly or something like that?
True. Now, one of the things that here in North Carolina, we do get a lot of snowstorms and ice storms. So, having something in your vehicle, because a lot of times you'll be out traveling and getting stranded in a snowstorm is never fun. Getting stranded in an ice storm is never fun. So there's actually a lot of people that will freeze to death in their cars because their car will run out of gas and they have nothing with them. So one time when I was traveling through the mountains of West Virginia back in my college days, I just happened to have a whole backpack full of gear with me, and I got stranded on the side of the interstate. And this was about 10 o'clock at night, and the snow was about probably 2 to 3 feet deep. And basically I got wedged up against the side of the guardrail, and it was on the side of a mountain and nobody could stop for me until the next day. So luckily I was able to pull all the clothes out of my bag and had enough to keep me alive because it was very cold. So just having the knowledge of where am I going today? Am I going to go on a canoe trip? Am I going to go take a ride? Is the weather nice? You never can tell. Like one year up here in the mountains, it was in the middle of June. It was right around summer solstice. And we were over in Roan Mountain, coming from Tennessee. We were coming back over this way on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And as we got up to the Grandfather Mountain, it had been a beautiful 75-degree day. And all of a sudden, this massive storm rolls in, and it starts hailing. And the hail accumulates. It's literally 3 or 4 inches deep. It comes down. The temperature on our car, like we had, the temperature gauge on the car, it went from 75 to 42 in like 15 minutes. And so as we're coming over the parkway, there's ice just piled up everywhere. And people are coming out of the woods wearing their cotton t-shirts and their little pair of cotton shorts, and they're like freezing. You can tell they're like freezing because they never know. They didn't prepare for it. So always thinking ahead of time where you're going to be, what you're going to need, what you're going to have to prepare for. So it becomes like what this part here about your wilderness mind. That's this part we'll go over here in a little while. So your wilderness mind is basically where you start developing this belief that I need to be prepared all the time. Because in this day and age, there's all kinds of things that could happen that could just knock out our power. I mean, things happen all the time. So it's always good to be thinking ahead of time. Where am I going? What am I wearing? What kind of conditions am I going to be in? Do I have water with me? Do I have any food? Do I have an extra layer of clothes? Do I have something to purify water? So this is a whole lifetime of learning that you're trying to incorporate into this whole wilderness mindset. So it's not an easy road, but if you're interested, there's lots of good stuff you can learn out there. YouTube's a pretty good example of stuff you can learn. So we're going to head down and we're going to work on shelter. That was a good question, by the way. Any more questions, comments? No? All right, cool. All right, everybody gather up over in the grass.
Should they leave their water bottles here? How long?
Yeah, we'll be there in about 30 minutes. If they want to take them, that's fine. Hold on, guys. Let me turn my camera off here.